Welcome to the Period Besties podcast with Stasha and Katie. Think about it as chatting with your best friends about all the TMI stuff you've never talked about before with two period coaches who've been helping hormones collectively for over 20 years now. I'm Stasha.
And I'm Katie, and we're pulling back the curtain on what it's like in the world of menstrual coaching. From puberty to menopause and everything in between, we're here to show you how period coaching can save the day. We'll share practical tips and information you can put to immediate use to improve your hormones and happiness.
We're removing the mystery, ending the taboo, and shining a light on just how powerful period coaching can be.
So whether you need period coaching or are considering becoming a period coach yourself, these episodes are going to help you. We'll share stories, coach live on air, and bring smart, savvy guests to share their wisdom too. Let's start today's episode.
Welcome everybody to our endometriosis masterclass today. So this is the class that I teach my period coaching school students. I'm going to try and fly through it because we normally have 90 minutes for these. I'm going to try and make it in an hour. So hang on to your seats, I guess. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to pop them in the chat box. I will stop and look up in there as things happen. But like I said, I'm going to try and jump in here. So today we're going to talk about endometriosis, what it is, who it affects, what we can look for, and what we can do. Again, this is something I share with my school students. So I kind of teach this in the realm of these are the things that we're looking for in our clients, sort of in that kind of vernacular. So whether this applies to you or perhaps a friend or something, it's just kind of keep that in mind. So endometriosis in the U.S., 11% of women 15 to 44-year-old equals 6.5 million. Now, it can affect people who do not identify as women as well, but these are just kind of the generic stats that they put out. So that's how it's worded. And it's 176 million worldwide as of our last numbering here. So it's a lot of people. It is tissue similar to the endometrium, the uterine lining that's located outside the uterus. So it can be found in lots of places in the body. Oftentimes it's surrounding organs, around the uterus, the ovaries, fallopian tubes, colon, bladder. And something that we often struggle with or just kind of notice as weird as just menstruating people is that a lot of times during our period, we find ourselves going to the bathroom a lot more. And that can be because that surround those two organs, the colon and the bladder are right there around the uterus. And as the prostaglandins that make the uterus contract to release the lining for our menstrual blood can get a little overzealous and affect surrounding organs, which is why we also see endometriosis tissue in those organs that surround it, just sort of that kind of area gets in there. But it can also move into other places and organs. It can move into joints. It can move into, I've seen as far as lungs and heart. And actually killed the patient because that endometriosis, that tissue had made it all the way up there and affected breathing and heart issues. So it can be very dangerous. So yeah, like I said, it can travel usually to surrounding areas like the ovaries, bladder, intestines, bowel, and appendix. So those are the most popular places that it's found. Sometimes if you have endometriosis and you have the scope to see where it is and they might say you don't have it, it may be because it's just not in that surrounding tissue and it could be in other areas, but a lot of times they just don't look in other areas. They just look at those surrounding places because that's usually where it is. So you want to, just make sure that your surgeon is doing a really thorough job. And there's also microendometriosis, which they can't see at all with our current diagnostic tools that they use. So, if you're still struggling, you may need to go to somebody who's really, really, really good at it and can look for unusual ways of presenting. It can be felt from the first period and it can continue through menopause. So it's not something that happens all the time, but it can happen where it can still affect you through menopause. It can happen post hysterectomy. So some people will go and have, the uterus removed and can still suffer from symptoms as if nothing had changed. So these are all a lot of the surgeries can bring a relief, and they do for a lot of people, but know that it's not everybody, and that there can be things that continue throughout time after other things. So it can be really frustrating if you happen to be one of those people that the typical things don't work for. So the most common symptoms that we see, so if this is you or a client or a friend, is severely painful cramps. So the bleeding from the cells and tissue outside of the uterus, and when that blood touches those other organs inside the abdomen, it can cause inflammation and irritation, creating pain. Can feel like searing, burning, stabbing, twisting, barbed wire. I've heard so many different variations on how it feels. I definitely had that burning, stabbing, barbed wire, twisting feeling where it was like compression and pain at the same time. So I definitely empathize with pretty much every painful description, because that was what I had, was the severely painful cramps, and they often start before your menstruation starts. So we often think of period problems as being things that happen while you're bleeding, but it can start, and endometriosis often does start in that deep luteal phase, that 4 to 5 days before menstruation, but it can start even earlier in your cycle. So it doesn't have to go along with your actual menstrual phase. That scar tissue can develop from the endometriosis and contribute to the pain. This is why working with a pelvic floor therapist can be really helpful, because that scar tissue needs to get broken up and released, and it can help to work with somebody on that one. Myoabdominal massage can also be helpful for that. There's a lot of different things that can happen, but that scar tissue can really make an impact on pain levels. So it's something else to just be aware of. Nausea and vomiting is very common with endometriosis. Often when I have a client that tells me they have very painful periods, I will ask, do you have viral symptoms? Right? Do you feel like you break out into a cold sweat? Do you feel like you've got a fever all of a sudden? Do you feel like you have a stomach flu? Do you feel like you've got food poisoning? Those kind of viral symptoms often goes along with endometriosis. It can be partially from the hormonal change being crazy. It can also just be from how the endometriosis starts and affects you. There's some different reasons for it. So there's some different ways that it can actually be alleviated as well. See, my worst cramping will be in ovulation, the 2 days before my bleed and the first day of my bleed. It's the day one of my bleed that's the worst, though. Yes. Unsure if the ovulation cramping is PCOS or endo, though. Yeah. And it could be a combination effect, right? Because the ovulation, as that egg is coming out of the ovary, it could be disrupting the endometriosis. That tissue could be surrounding it. So it's aggravating that. Yeah, it's not fun. I'm the same way. My first 3 hours of my period are usually the worst of my pain, but sometimes I get this one day, and then I'll have a good day, and then I'll get my period, and I'll have like one really painful day, and then it'll be fine, but nothing happens. I don't get my period or anything, and then the next day I'll get my period. So it can happen in some really strange ways, which is part of the problem, I think, for taking endometriosis people seriously. I think that might have been part of the reason why it was not taken as seriously, because there's not exact repeatable symptoms in every person. Long and or heavy periods. This is very common with endometriosis as well. You're losing a lot of blood, and you really want to make sure that you're getting the nutrition and things that you need, so that even if you are losing a lot of blood, it's not doing as much nutrient loss, iron loss, those kinds of things as it could be. Also switch to reusable products, because I found this, and a lot of my clients have reiterated this, and it's come up In my research, not that there's been a research study that I found yet, but switching from reusable products can lighten the flow. So sometimes if you're having longer, heavy periods, even if it's not endometriosis related, getting somebody to switch to reusables can sometimes lighten the menstrual cycle, lighten the blood flow. So it's can be a very easy, simple switch that can make a big difference. Diarrhea, constipation, painful bowel movements. Oftentimes, that endometriosis tissue is around the colon, the small intestine, the large intestine. So we get these very painful digestive issues. And again, those prostaglandins that are causing inflammation, which is good, it's what it's supposed to do, but it can cause diarrhea because of that. Because it's squeezing the colon just like it's squeezing the uterus, and it can cause that diarrhea there. And then constipation can come as well, just from all of the disruptions in the system. So no matter which way you veer, it can help to really be attentive to your gut health. Fatigue, a very common symptom. I often say endometriosis could be considered a chronic pain condition. It could be considered a chronic fatigue condition, both. It's definitely a tough one, and it can coexist. You find a lot of times people with endometriosis have other issues, Epstein-Barr, Crohn's disease, other kind of autoimmune disorders, fibromyalgia. And so things get blurry. MS, I have a client with endo and MS. It can get really blurry to know like exactly which is which, but kind of at the end of the day, the answers are very similar. So it's all right. Let's see, in the chat box says mine lightens when I use renewables. Yes, same here. It's substantial, the difference. So I've definitely stuck to the reusable menstrual products. The cold sweats and vomiting were the hardest to get heard on. People thought I was making it up. Yes. Oh my God. Sames. Yeah, I'm glad not to have had one of those cycles for a very long time though. Good. It seems after reusables, I'm now heavy first 2 days and last 3 days, almost nothing. Yeah, that's kind of how my transition was as well. I kind of went from 7 days to a lighter 5 day 6, and then a lighter day 4, day 5, and then now I'm really kind of a lighter day 3, day 4. So it's really just the first 2 days. Then day 3 is very light. Day 4 is super light. And day 5, maybe just a little bit of spotting. So it's kind of incredible, that change. Yeah. So painful sex, again, that tissue surrounding the vaginal canal, scar tissue, those kinds of things. It can be on the cervix. It can just get anywhere and everywhere. So it can cause really painful sex. And I did have a friend who that was her only symptom. So it can be a strange set of symptoms as well. Infertility. A lot of people with endometriosis find out they have endometriosis because they're having trouble getting pregnant. And they're going in for fertility treatments, and they're trying to figure out why the fertility treatments aren't working, and they stumble upon the endometriosis. I see a lot of people who may have suspected or didn't know that they have endometriosis. They have a C-section and then find out after the C-section that their doctors have said, oh, you have endometriosis. So it can be very painful. It doesn't have to be. It can affect fertility. It's about a 50-50 chance of affecting fertility. That doesn't mean that you're permanently infertile. It does mean that there may be some things that need to be done to help reduce the odds of infertility. I hope that makes sense. But it doesn't necessarily make it permanent. And just like I call myself an endo remission, you can increase your fertility odds as well. Back pain and or shooting down the legs pain. So this is one that the back pain is kind of more common because, again, those prostaglandins work their way around the lower abdomen and the pelvic cradle. And so sore backs, lower back pain, those kinds of things with your period can be quite normal because those prostaglandins are just sort of swimming in your pelvic bowl. That shooting down the legs pain, sometimes it can affect the tissue, get in the joints, wrap around nerves. So you can start to see how that pain can be in really strange parts of the body, and you might not know why it's happening. Yes, I have what feels like sciatica only before my period, which is that's a clear cyclical issue sign, right? Yeah, so it's one of those kind of things that most people don't relate to it, but it is actually a lot more common than you would guess. So why? We don't know. There are some really good guesses out there. And since I've been doing this research for going into 30 years now, these are the guesses that have seemed to persist, that there seems to be some level of study into, that they have looked into and may not have like the official definitive, but here's some of the top guesses anyway. Genetic first degree relatives of affected women are 5 to 7 times more likely to have surgically confirmed disease. So my mother, my aunt both had endometriosis. This makes it very, clearly that's where this comes from. But getting those older generations diagnosed is also not as easy, right? Because a lot of them didn't have even the words for it. So, like we thought we were gaslit by the medical industry. Imagine like our moms and grandmoms. So it's tough to know sometimes, but if you can talk to someone you're related to that had pain, and ask them how their periods were they painful? I sat down with my aunt and my mother probably 2019, and for the first time found out that my aunt had endometriosis and had talked to her about it, and she described the painful periods and everything, and she just was like, oh my god, I didn't know that was genetic. I thought I just had really bad periods, and then that's what endometriosis was. So it was a really interesting conversation with her. The psoas in low, deep abdomen is millimeters from the biggest lower back muscle, and the spasms travel. Oh, they do. I know. They go so much hand in hand. Yeah, my hips crack. My lower back, the coccyx joints in the spine, like all of those crack on me. And I know I'm getting close to my period because they start to crack. And then I know I'm kind of finishing my period because they crack again. It's like this opening and closing, and everything pops and cracks. And then pops and cracks. It's just, oh my goodness. Travel and implant. So the travel and implant theory is via blood or lymphatic channels, similar to the way cancer cells spread. There's a lot of overlap to endometriosis and cancer, which you will see throughout today. So travel and implant is one of the theories. Now, obviously, you can have genetic predisposition for it, and travel and implant can be how it gets around your body, right? So like these aren't mutually exclusive either. So transform cells in any location may turn into endometrial cells. This is, it's a bit like that kind of cancer cells eating, destroying, taking over, and sucking away other cells. It's definitely one that it seems like, oh my God, but it's one of the guesses that they are studying and looking at. Direct transplantation, which is surgery contamination. So those C-sections that I mentioned before, sometimes when they discover that they have the endometriosis, the surgeons are supposed to go in and remove everything, but now you've had a C-section as well. So obviously a lot of things are happening. And they don't get it all out, which is very common. But then that scalpel moving all over those different parts of the body contaminates other areas. And I've heard several stories from women who tell me that their surgery scars now hurt during their endometriosis flares. And that would be direct transplantation. Retrograde menstruation, which by the way is very common. A lot of people have retrograde menstruation, where as the uterus is squeezing, it kind of pushes it up and out the fallopian tubes. That's not actually as abnormal as one might think. But in this case, it's doing that, and now it's turning it into this endometrial tissue. So it may be an immune system issue where it's not being dealt with properly, like a normal person, normal, quote, air quotes here, but someone without endometriosis would never have the issue. It would be eliminated and dealt with in the body properly. But in our case, it turns into these cells. So that's where they get kind of this immune system theory. And so one of those guesses is that endometriosis could be an autoimmune issue. It doesn't respond to the current autoimmune drugs, which is why they're not classifying it as autoimmune currently, but so that's just the cool drugs we have right now. Like it could be different tomorrow. So, kind of keeping an eye on that. So there's that faulty immune system. So while they don't classify it as an autoimmune disorder currently, there's clearly something going wrong in the immune system somehow, somewhere. And then high estrogen exacerbates this. So it seems to encourage growth. So a lot like sugar encourages cancer growth, high estrogen encourages this endometrial growth. And sugar increases estrogen. So, just kind of going to throw that out there, though we'll get to this more at the end. So high estrogen can make it worse. Progesterone seems to reduce the growth, delay it, slow it. So we want to have really good balanced hormones with endometriosis because most people have high estrogen. And even if you have proper progesterone, it's not balancing out the estrogen, right? So, endometriosis is not necessarily a hormonal imbalance. Making sure those hormones are balanced is huge for reducing the symptoms. My great Nana used to take a day off every month, and my mom says childbirth was nothing compared to period cramps. Yeah, I'd take a guess that both had endometriosis. Yeah, it is probably a very good guess. Yep. So some of the known risk factors are menarche beginning at less than 11 years of age, so early, getting your period early. This is part of that estrogen, right? Like having a lot of estrogen can cause this, and heavy and prolonged menses. So having really long, heavy bleeds seem to go hand in hand with that as well. So known things about endometriosis, but not necessarily understood. There is a different gut biome with people who have endometriosis. You will see how fermentation is part of one of the things that we talk about later in this presentation. We talk about things that we can do about it. They don't know if this is one of those things where like the gut biome is different, therefore increasing the endometriosis issues, or if the endometriosis causes a different gut biome, but it is there, and it is something that we do know. DNA methylation. So you may have heard of people who have a hard time with certain vitamins because their methylation is different. It seems that goes hand in hand with endometriosis for some reason. So, if you're supplementing with vitamins, you may want to try getting like the methylated versions. I don't have the DCA clinical trial stuff pulled up right now. I had it for this class, but I don't have it. Anyway, go look up the DCA clinical trial. It's really interesting, and I don't have it pulled up, so I'm sorry I can't dive into it right this second, but it is really quite an interesting one. The endocannabinoid system is it's kind of tied to our immune system. So our immune system and our endocannabinoid system help regulate these things. Helps regulate our homeostasis in the body. And it's seen that people with endometriosis have a malfunctioning endocannabinoid system. So again, in that kind of like autoimmune disorder kind of blanket umbrella where kind of like a lot of things fall under it and we don't really understand them, this is another one of those things where we see that the endocannabinoid system is not working properly, but we don't really know why. All right. So then we have, actually, you know what? I wonder if I have I do. Yes, I do have notes on that over here. Hold on. Let me see. I do have some of these notes. The DCA clinical trial happened to see if DCA, which is a big long word that I am going to absolutely butcher here, but dichloroacetate excess lactate in the endo patient's pelvis. The drug DCA seemed to lower lactate production, reducing the survival rate and growth of endometriosis. There it is. So that's what that was. If you want to look into it more, you can. But it was kind of an interesting thing that lactate production, so similarly to sore muscles, the lactic acid in the sore muscles, kind of in that similar thing where endo patients have excess amounts of this lactate in the pelvis. And so giving them the DCA drug seemed to lower that production and then reduce the survival rate and growth of endometriosis, which is very similar to the cannabis study that they did in 2020. 59% of women using cannabis to self-treat endometriosis symptoms say they were able to stop using pain medications, particularly opioids, entirely because of using cannabis to self-treat. So it seems to help prop up the endocannabinoid system and so help to reduce the growth and the pain of it. So there's some interesting things there. There is one group of people looking into different chemicals to eat away the endometriosis growths, like peptides and microphages. Nanomedicine and physical therapy are also being looked into. So those are the research that's currently being done. And, hopefully we'll have some updates next year for the school students, but we'll see. Shouldn't symptoms decrease once in menopause? Yes. It doesn't for everybody, though, which is where it kind of goes, this is weird. Why isn't this responding like we would expect it to? Because it doesn't do it for everybody. Just the same as having a hysterectomy doesn't always stop it for people. So you would think that hysterectomy or menopause would end it, but it doesn't for everybody. It does for a lot, but it doesn't for everybody. So yeah, it's one of those problems that we have. So oftentimes endometriosis is misdiagnosed or just completely missed because they're blaming it on other things, or it could go hand in hand. And so they're not diagnosing the endometriosis because they're diagnosing the other thing and then calling it a day. So IBS is something that you want to look out for if you have a client and they, if any of these things, IBS, appendicitis, pelvic inflammatory disease, chronic fatigue, cysts, musculoskeletal issues, or mental health, all of those things are oftentimes misdiagnosed, or you can have endo and IBS. You can have endometriosis and chronic fatigue. They can be both true at the same time, but a lot of times that's where they stop and they don't go into the endometriosis diagnosis because at the moment the only way to do that is surgery. So let's see, I was told by my first gyno I just had gas. Yeah, and I was told by mine that I couldn't possibly have endometriosis because I was too young. That it took years and years and years to develop. So it must have, though I had all sorts of gut tests done, everything was fine. But, it couldn't be endo because it took decades to develop. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but hopefully these things will stop happening so much. And the more we advocate for ourselves, the better it will get to. PID is really pelvic inflammatory disease is a really common one as well. And it's another one that's tough because there's a lot of things that can coexist in both of them. So it's one that often gets borderline, both misdiagnosed, those kinds of things. It happens a lot. 75.2% of patients reported being misdiagnosed with another physical health problem and or a mental health problem at 49.5%. Gynecologists misdiagnosed at 53.2% and general practitioners at 34.4%. So I just kind of thought it was a really fascinating, there's a lot of misdiagnosis essentially. Diagnosis disclaimer, stages of diagnosis do not equal lived experience. You can be stage 1 and have a very painful period. You can have stage 4 and have no symptoms at all. So the stages of diagnosis do not equal lived experience. So it doesn't really matter as far as your experience of it in your body is concerned. So if somebody, if you do get a diagnosis and they're like, well, you're lucky it's only stage 1 and you're really suffering, don't let them gaslight you, don't let them, great, but I'm still in real pain here. So again, this is for my period coaches. So where do we start with our clients is we notice those symptoms. We notice the pain. We ask about the viral issues, about the menstrual length, how heavy, how long is your period? Do you have painful sex? Do you have cyclical fatigue? infertility issues, have you tried to get pregnant and failed, those kinds of things. So we're going to ask them questions that go along with those symptoms to see what's happening. And we're also going to ask them cyclical questions, right? Like, does your fatigue seem to ebb and flow with your cycle? If not, start charting and find out, right? So we're going to ask cyclical questions as well, because generally with endometriosis, you will see a rise and fall that goes along with your menstrual cycle of the symptoms. The viral symptoms generally are only there before or during your menstrual cycle. They're not all month long. They don't randomly pop up in follicular and then you don't see them again for 2 months, right? So we want to see if they're going along cyclically as well. Follow up, ask, about those other symptoms. If they need to start charting, make sure they're doing it. Go have them do some testing. Easy things to do are like, okay, great, go to your OBGYN. Get some tests. Make sure it's not cysts or fibroids. Make sure there's nothing physical happening. Have them do all of the tests that Western medicine can do that are not horribly invasive, at least to start, and see what you can rule out, right? So if we know it's not cysts and fibroids, we know it's not anything that we can test through blood work, we know it's not these other things, then you can go, okay, well, then we are very likely looking at endometriosis here. And make sure that you're getting that family history if it's available. Not everyone has family history available, but if they have it or they can get it, get it. What is it not, right? So this is that non-cyclical thing. So if it's not a cyclical issue, then it's likely not an endometriosis symptom in this case, right? So if they are getting viral symptoms, but they're not monthly and they're coming in like follicular every couple of months, it's likely a non-cyclical issue. It's like diagnosing cyclical migraines. Cyclical migraines are going to come with your cycle. So if you're getting migraines throughout your cycle all month long or sporadically at different phases of your cycle, it's not likely a cyclical hormonal migraine. It's likely a more, the more run-of-the-mill common migraine, right? So is it none or is it cyclical? And finding that out. The only way of testing for endometriosis is endoscopic surgery. However, just recently, as in like the last month, there is a French company who is doing saliva testing for endometriosis, and they have been very successful with it. Their testing has gone really, really well. I am on the wait list. So also my partner's family is in France, and I've been telling him that I may have to have his sisters submit because France is going to get the first wave of tests. And I was like, have one of them pretend they're me. But yeah, so we may have a saliva test in the next year or two. So it's very exciting. I'm really hopeful about it. I will keep everyone in my community posted, and do please feel free to follow me on Instagram because I've been posting on there about what I've been learning there. So how we can help as coaches, help ourselves, how can we help? Gut health. So that's the first place we got to start doing the gut health stuff. So traditionally, gut health and healing protocols involve getting rid of the things that irritate it, like the gluten, the sugar, the caffeine, the alcohol, the irritants, right? It can be soy, it can be dairy. I had an endometriosis client who dairy was 100% her enemy. Gluten is mine. So find out what is irritating your body and get rid of it. And then make sure you're getting your bone broths in and your fermented foods in. And this is going to be daily for a long time. So you're going to want to make sure that you're getting in those really good gut healing foods and things regularly. Trigger foods, right? So like the gluten, the dairy, the sugar, the soy, preservatives, food coloring, all of these things can be part of those irritations. So I often recommend clients, especially if they're having high levels of symptoms, to do 30 days of whole foods. Nothing from a box or a bag, no preservatives, just real food, no gluten, no soy, none of the junk. But that leaves a lot of food. I mean, we're talking like brown rice, buckwheat, quinoa, all sorts of whole grains that are gluten-free. There's lots of the grains that are gluten-free. meats, vegetables, all of these things. So there's a ton of food available. And like when I always say, when in doubt, get some Mexican, because rice and beans are delicious with hot sauce and tomatoes and lettuce on top. So, but just get the trigger foods out and see how you feel. Flow freedom. This is estrogen linked to increase in growth and spread. So Flow Freedom is a program that I teach. All the school students go through Flow Freedom. So this is kind of there for them to take their clients through the Flow Freedom program. But because the way the Flow Freedom program works, it's designed to reduce estrogen and get your hormones back into balance. So that estrogen being linked to the increase in growth and spread means helping to reduce the excess estrogen, which is what we do, which is basically what Flow Freedom does, is going to help. So to, walk your clients through that. For those of you who are not in my program, you can. Flow Freedom is a standalone program and you're welcome to join it. But think about all of the things that bring stress and know that stress increases your hormonal imbalance. Your body steals your progesterone, your reproductive hormones, the progesterone, the thing that helps reduce the endometrial growth, it steals it and makes cortisol instead. So the more stressed out you are, the less progesterone you have, which means more estrogen is affecting your body, which means you're increasing the growth of the endo. So you want to make sure that you're increasing the progesterone production, decreasing the estrogen to a nice level balance, and that's where you really want to go with it. Have I seen the new stats this week showing that those with endo are at a higher risk of ovarian cancer? I have not. I'd be very interested to know if that can be reversed by managing endometriosis. I think in general, most cancer, like the holistic avoid cancer, like we have breast cancer in my family, the BRCA1 gene alteration is in my family. And so I kind of spent most of my 30s trying to figure out how to avoid breast cancer because everyone was diagnosed in their 30s in my family. And actually either died or because they just didn't have any treatment options at the time, or have had double mastectomies since then. So kind of the same things, right? Like gut health and reducing sugar and reducing irritants all seem to help with cancer avoidance or reduction in likelihood, that kind of holistic, trying the best you can to avoid it. Sometimes unavoidable. My sister has the BRCA1 gene variant and she's one of the healthiest people I've ever met in my life and eats like a bird and still ended up with cancer twice. So you can do everything right and still not be able to avoid it, but you can certainly mitigate it, or at least try and avoid it and reduce the likelihoods of it. And that's where we're looking at those kinds of, the less sugar you eat, because that's what it lives off of and grows on, right? The alcohols, those kinds of things that convert into sugar in the bloodstream. So it'd be interesting to see. I'll have to look that up. I'm interested to see that. PTSD. If you suffer from endometriosis, and especially if you have those painful flooding, any of those kinds of really serious physical symptoms, the likelihood of having some level of PTSD is very high. So you want to make sure that you or your clients are getting some kind of help with the anxiety, the depression, the fatigue, the hyper alertness that comes along with PTSD. Whether it's an EFT or journaling or talk therapy or all of the above, you want to make sure that there is some kind of level of help in that realm because they have some level of post-traumatic stress disorder. You can't live through something every month knowing that you've got 40 years of every month having to survive through this pain that feels like you're dying, being ripped apart from the inside, knowing that there's nothing you can do to stop it, knowing that there's nothing you can do to ease it, knowing there's nothing you can do to get to the others, but live through it month after month after month before you start to question living, right? I certainly did. So now that I know that there are things I can do to reduce it, I feel so much more empowered and in control and better about it. But I still have anxiety when I get close to my period, right? It's vastly reduced as I've been working through this. But I still get into that kind of deep luteal phase and go, okay, here's, haven't had a bad period in years now. Like, here's to hoping this is another one that's going to be okay. But I still go through my tapping and I still breathe and I still do my meditations just to make sure that I'm feeling as stable and okay as I can. So make sure that that is addressed. Caffeine, alcohol, sugar, gluten, and dairy. In my experience working with endo people, these are the top ones. These are the top things that just make it worse. So if you can convince your people, I will say that dairy can have some flexibility to it depending on the person. I mean, like I said, I had one client who dairy is just her absolute enemy. She can have none. But some people can have some people can have like just goat and no cow. Some people can have like some raw cheeses, but nothing pasteurized. You can kind of play an experiment with dairy, but I recommend just getting rid of it for a while, giving your body a chance to just rest and digest. And I mean like probably multiple months. And then you may be able to start having a play with it and reintegrating it. But as for caffeine, alcohol, sugar, and gluten, they're very likely going to be no-nos forever. Sorry. Probiotics. Yay, probiotics. We love our probiotics. Remember that throwback to how endometriosis people have a different gut biome from non-endo people? This is where your probiotics come in. I highly recommend you get them through food versus a capsule. Like kombucha, or maybe not kombucha, because sometimes that can irritate candida, but sauerkraut, kimchi, kvass, fermented curries, chutneys, fermented pickles, right? Like those are really popular in the grocery stores these days. You're just looking for ones that don't have vinegar in them. They just will have salt and water as the brine. So you can probably, those kinds of things are really good. And don't forget to drink your brine, because that's where so many of those probiotic little guys are living. Drink your brine. Also, it's good for balancing your electrolytes and hydrating. So, perk, you'll be more hydrated. So here's a little section on cannabis. Because this research is actually being done, right? Like there's so many people researching cannabis and pain conditions. A lot of the endometriosis research these days is being done through the lens of cannabis. So we might not be able to get endo research done because that's a woman's disease, but we can get cannabis research done. So I have this section here, and it grew this year because a lot of studies came out this year. It was really quite exciting. So there was the Australian online survey interviewing women from an endometriosis support group found that cannabis and CBD oil were the most effective of all of the self-care techniques for endometriosis pain. So I just thought that was such a cool note there. So if you live in a place where you can get your hands on real CBD or real CBG, give it a try and see how it goes for you. Chinese texts described its usefulness in the relief of pain and menstrual cramps. In ancient India, the anxiety relieving effect of bhang, the Indian term for marijuana ingested as food, had been recorded more than 3,000 years ago. So if you're looking at Chinese medicine or like Ayurvedic, we're looking at 3,000 years ago being recorded as an alleviation to menstrual pain in two different parts of the world, in two healing modalities, and they both came to the same conclusion. So, so that's kind of a prop there. And then the endocannabinoid dysfunction. So the system should be able to cause this apoptosis, natural cell death, and prevent excess growth. Like that's what it's supposed to do. That's one of its jobs in our body. So it does not seem to do that for endometriosis patients. It's not killing off these problematic cells. So studies showed that stimulating the CB1 and CB2 receptors decreased the growth. So this can be done with THC, CBD, CBGs, these kinds of things. I have personally found in myself and in my practice that combinations seem to work better than single isolated ones, and full spectrum works better than isolates. So that, you may get what you can, but it seems like those seem to be the most effective. And then the THC in mice reduced pain and limited the development of endometrial cysts. So that's a study that hopefully will get moved over to humans, and we'll see how it goes. But like I said, kind of all of those things. So I explain it this way, like, people will maybe take an edible and have way too much THC and be like, oh my god, I'm losing my mind. So then they take CBD to help kind of bring them down, because it affects the same receptors, and since the CBD is non-psychoactive, it will go in and block up some of those receptors, so then the THC is not getting into as many receptors. So it's kind of one of those situations where you've got these receptors and it will take different things, much like your estrogen receptors will take phytoestrogens, like in flax seeds. So you can sort of mitigate what's coming in and help balance it out with these things. So I personally use CBD and CBG as well as THC to manage mine after I had done all of the dietary things for my own needs. And I had also done a huge lifestyle revamp. And I mean, like, enormous, changed everything in my life, lifestyle revamp, but it worked. And now I'm in that kind of fine tuning stage. So I started using the CBD, and then one of the bud tenders that I went to and was explaining the pain to said that he'd read a lot of research on CBG and how it seemed to be really helpful for pain management. So I have played with various different combinations, and I have found personally that all three of those things in combination seem to work best. That is for me personally. I haven't had the opportunity to really work with all that many endometriosis clients that live in a place where it's legal and accessible for everything. So I can't talk about it more anecdotally on a broader scale. But I can say that for my own experience, that seems to be super helpful. So the NHS did acknowledge endometriosis as being one of the top 20 most painful diseases known to man. I have had some of the other issues on that list, and I will tell you that my endometriosis was far more painful than any of those other things that were on that list. But maybe I just didn't have the more extreme versions of them. But yeah, it is so we do have finally some acknowledgement there. This was last year that they declared this. There's very little known about it officially. It's tough to diagnose. You need to advocate for yourself, for your friends, for, and everybody and anybody. I'm also on this bandwagon, or I might be driving the bandwagon. I don't know. I haven't really seen anybody else out there talking about it, but I really think endometriosis should be one of the things that you can get disability for. Lord knows I could not go to work. I mean, I did. I took vitamin and drank I took Vicodin and drank Red Bulls like they were my job to make it through my job with my endometriosis. Meanwhile, still going to the bathroom to throw up every hour, like just so violently ill from the endo. So it should be one of those things that you can get some disability to support with. So that's kind of where some of my advocation and so getting more research done and some real help done. And also not trying to force people to work within the patriarchal push 24/7 nonsense, because that's not good for anybody. And it's certainly not good for endometriosis. So the less patriarchal BS that we buy into and push through, the better the endometriosis symptoms are. And it's one of the reasons I started my own business, was so that I could take that week off and not work and be able to just rest and relax and take care of my body. And it has made one of the biggest differences in my pain levels that I've ever had. So between the diet and that lifestyle change, it's made an enormous difference. And I actually have very little pain now, but it's a big one. We can relieve the pain. We can relieve some of the symptoms, reduce some of the symptoms, and and get into some sort of state of remission, which is kind of the ultimate goal, is to get into some kind of form of remission so that it's not as terrible as it, was before. So you can regain a quality of life. I am going to say, though, that one of the things that we shouldn't be aspiring to is to be able to go work hard and play hard. Like, that shouldn't be the goal of, like, I want to get into remission of my endometriosis so that I can be a good cog in the machine and push hard, right? It should be that I want to be able to have some rest and relaxation and relief, and not just so that we can go push into that patriarchal mindset. So encourage the relief. If a client comes to me and says, I've got a surgery scheduled, should I do it? Yes, absolutely. Get the surgery, get the reduction of that tissue, get the relief, because it's much easier to change those diet and lifestyle things if you're not in a state of trauma. So get the surgery, get some relief, get that break, and then let's focus on ways to prevent that growth from continuing to grow, because it does. Surgery doesn't stop it. It just takes it all out, so you start over again. So then after surgery, kind of do that, or even before surgery, start doing some things to help reduce that. Try, if you can and are in a place with cannabis, again, it can be helpful relief. I don't like to put things in as supplements where now you're reliant on this thing, right? Again, I don't want you to go, oh, well, all right, I'm going to go get this cannabis so that I can go be a good patriarchal cog in the machine. Because you're just going to end up needing more and more and more. It's going to be more and more expensive, which is just not really doing anybody any real help, right? So it can be very helpful, but don't make it the only thing you do. Do the diet changes, do the lifestyle changes, make it better for yourself. Look for those triggers, and it's not just food triggers. Look for lifestyle, work, and relationship triggers as well. What are those things that really stress you out? Because again, stress steals your progesterone to turn to cortisol, which the progesterone reduces the growth. It makes your estrogen levels higher, which is encouraging growth. So you need to find those stress triggers wherever they are. For me, they were work and food. So as soon as I quit working for terrible people and dealt with my diet, everything got much better. So what are those things that you can do? And then remove and eliminate things. I like to add in the healthy foods first. I like to add in the gut healing foods first, and then go through and do the remove and eliminate. However, if you are in a high level of trauma, or you have clients in a high level of trauma, you're going to want to probably do some elimination work right out of the gate. And again, that disability support, just advocating for seeing this on a bigger scale for people. I also want to say that one of the things I found really helpful for pain relief was extremely strong ginger tea. And this is something that I only recently read a study on, so it didn't actually make it in here for the school this year, but I hopefully will remember it for next year. Really, really strong ginger, like fresh ginger, is a huge pain reducer. It helps plug the receptors of pain. So I did this in early 20s, so early 2000s, where I would make a really strong ginger tea, and before I was going to get my period, and before the pain set in, so that I could just drink it throughout my period. And it actually had a bigger influence on reducing my pain than the narcotics did. I was on Darvocet, I had Vicodins, several different narcotics, and none of them made as big a difference in the pain as really strong ginger tea. And ginger tea has the bonus of also helping reduce nausea. So not only did those narcotics sometimes make me nauseous, but the ginger tea reduced the nausea and the pain, and it was much better. These days, I still make my ginger tea because it works really well. I like to have it on hand. And I had a fun, when I ordered my CBD, the company sent me CBD honey. So I've been adding my CBD honey, and at least until it runs out, into my ginger tea, and it's been really nice. So I, just throwing that in there too as an option. So it also has antiviral and antibacterial qualities. Yeah, and some of that ginger tea, it might be in part helping kill off those bad bacteria in the gut. It might just be helpful in that. Again, this is hypothesis. I don't know. We don't know, but it could. So wouldn't that be great? So in conclusion, there is hope. There are things that we can do at home for ourselves that can make an impact on the pain levels and the floods and all of those things. There are definitely things that we can do to make a difference, to feel more in remission. We need to make noise. I love Endometriosis Awareness Month. I spend a whole month making a lot of noise on social media. We need to be advocating for more research, for disability, for help, for relief. and be honest and hopeful, right? So this is again for my school students, but be honest with your clients. It's never going to go away. There's no cure, at least not currently. But there is hope that we can actually reduce symptoms. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I can't believe we made it in the top of the hour and we did it. Yeah. I hope that was helpful. I hope you learned something. I hope you have something to try. Please stay in touch with me. Let me know how things are going. I absolutely want to hear from everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Spread the word and go celebrate Endo Awareness Month on Instagram with me.
A big shout out and thank you to our sponsors for today's episode, Period Coaching School and Katie Bressack Wellness.
Thanks to you, our favorite bestie, for listening to the Period Besties podcast, where no topic is TMI. And of course, share this episode with your besties.
Remember to leave us a 5-star review, nothing less than the best for us besties, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can follow us on Instagram at Stasha Washburn and at Katie Bressack, or email us at periodbestiespodcast@gmail.com.
Check out more about us at katiebressack.com and periodcoachingschool.com. And of course, check the show notes for free goodies and extras that support this episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye for now, besties.